Okay, access to the reference materials. Access to the materials is available through the website. The first point of call is to contact us, and the way to do that is to, on the A-SPEC website, click on the contact topic next to the search box, and it'll take you to a form to complete, and then you can make a request. What we ask is that everybody completes a non-disclosure agreement form. And we also ask that our members, our councils and water authorities, do not forward a copy of the specifications. And the reason for that is that we want to make sure that the consultants have a non-disclosure agreement that's signed and applicable, and that we use that as our first point of contact. And by doing it as our first point of contact, we can then have a conversation with you about your experience in delivering data digitally, what kind of systems you have in place. Maybe we can provide you some tips. We could direct you to some vendors if you're looking for tools for your survey equipment. So, for example, you may want to go, that we've got vendors like Civil Survey Solutions, we've got vendors like Geocomp Consulting, LizTech, who have tools within their software for surveyors to be able to capture the data, catalog it in the field, and then process it in-house. So we can put you in contact with the key contacts that we have there. Issues and resolutions. We started developing a ticketing system so that we can log the support requests coming in and track them. We've put that on hold at the moment because we're finding that the system that we've currently started with still needs some development, and so we're putting it on hold. We're looking at other systems. So for the time being, continue to send through your inquiries into the info@GISA email address, and anybody that already has a link to this ticketing system, we haven't disabled it, it's still there for the people that were beta testers. Please continue to use that. There are a number of actions that are in progress or ongoing. So here's what's ongoing at the moment, and you'll see that at the bottom that we have the ticketing system that's on hold. This was provided to you in the agenda that you got. This is a list of our current stakeholder community, and it's growing. We're having more traction in New South Wales now, and we're continuing to increase our members in Victoria and WA. And the opportunity now is to get a real sense of what are the critical things that are of interest and importance across the sector, not just specific to a jurisdiction. Now, A-SPEC also appears in other processes. So, for example, in Victoria, we have A-SPEC that's been challenged in the Victorian Civil Administration Tribunal. We also have the Victorian Planning Authority that includes D-Spec and A-SPEC as part of their model planning conditions. We know that in WA, once the permit is issued, then the councils include the requirement for A-SPEC data as an engineering condition. In Victoria and New South Wales, it comes out as part of the permit condition or the contract conditions that are provided for capital works programs. There's also, some of you may be familiar with subsurface utility standard, and both Gabby and I have been involved with the recent update that was carried out last year that resulted in the update of the specification being launched in 2019. And that specification is there to assist organisations in identifying, in qualifying what kind of method they've used to identify what's below the surface. Our involvement with that has also resulted in contributing our code lists as a way to assist them with standardizing some of the codes that they were looking to include. Now, we've included this with D-Spec, A-SPEC and W-Spec being the three primary specifications that we have for subsurface utilities. And what that looks like is that you will have on the left, highlighted in yellow, is a typical, bless you, a typical, what exists in AS5488 and how it lines up with the specification. So what we've created is a roadmap to go from not just identifying what's there, what process you've used and the key things, but if you want to go into A-SPEC, what are the extra elements that you need to take on so that you can contribute a full D-Spec or S-Spec or W-Spec compliant product. If you'd like to know more information, please look at the D-Spec documents or the S-Spec or W-Spec documents. So, ISO 55000. Our statement is very concise. We focus on A-SPEC being an enabler to best practice for asset management. How do we do that? We focus on putting the foundation in place around the kind of data that is required to be able to effectively manage the specifications. A-SPEC is about the inventory. You won't see any information in there about condition or risk or criticality. So the focus is what are the key characteristics that we want to know about assets. So that's our brief recap and overview about A-SPEC. Are there any questions? Feel free to, thanks Mary, feel free to chip in through the chat if all of a sudden there's a question that crops up and I've already moved on. Okay, so this session, this is where the rubber hits the road, and there's a lot of content in here, and really we're open to your feedback. So I'm going to be presenting a lot of stuff here, and there's going to be quite a bit of explanation about things, a little bit like frequently asked questions, but we also want it to be informative for you. So if there is anything that we haven't touched on that you want to touch on, please bring it up. First off, we're looking at, and I'm going to time myself here so that I know just what's going on with my time. Okay, so first off, yes, we are proposing to expand the asset types. And at this point, what we're considering is pressure mains, pump stations, and the kind of assets that are linked to those two main features. So it'll be something like fittings, valves, very similar to what already exists in S-SPEC and W-SPEC. So we're not planning to reinvent the wheel. What we're planning to do is utilize what's already been developed. And why are we doing this? Because we know that there are a number of councils that use pressure mains or rising mains and pump stations for their stormwater. So the process will be that we'll develop an outline and we'll distribute it initially to our members, to our council members for their feedback and to see whether we take it to the next step. It's also important to cover off how we make modifications from requests. So over the years, and bearing in mind that D-Spec was first published in 2004, there's been quite a number of updates so that we maintain its robustness and its future-proofness. And the way that we do that is that somebody will make a request. The process that we use is a 4-step process, as outlined there. The key thing is, yes, we can come up with the structure. That's the easy bit. However, unless it's of value to the community, we don't know that unless we get the feedback from the community. You are the subject matter experts. Whether it's the council or the surveyors or the engineers or the contractors, you know what practically works. And yes, there is a situation where we can have too much data, but that's not the focus. The focus is, what do we need to know about the asset? What we then look at is, if there is a table that exists with those kind of attributes. And a good example is head walls. Head walls and end walls used to be part of the pit table. We then identified that there is different kinds of information needed for head walls, so it was split out into its own asset class, as per point 3. The really critical element for us is the socializing, and that's where the distribution for feedback comes back. And we're open to all sorts of feedback. If you want to tell, no, it doesn't work, it's not a great idea, George. It's not a great idea, Gabby, that we go down this path. Well, that's okay. We want to get a sense of why it's not a great idea. Do you have an alternative? And that way we keep the conversation going. Have we got some proposed new attributes? Actually, we do. We're proposing that an area of works identifier is created. And why are we doing that? Well, essentially, all of the details within the area of works polygon were provided with each table. There was a decision made a couple of versions ago to remove all of that and put it into an area of works polygon. And as a result of that, what we're now seeing is that there are multiple area of works polygons coming in, and when they're overlaid onto an existing system and there are existing assets, it's very difficult to actually identify what was built when and what the key characteristics of that particular project were. So here is what we're proposing for the area of works identifier, and this is what we've created for a couple of our clients. For subdivisions, we request that you concatenate 3 fields: the subdivision name, the subdivision stage, and the date of construction. And we request that the format for the date is as we've specified in the brackets. For capital works, the same structure. If there's a project name, the project number, and the date of construction. The area works ID is an alphanumeric, 100 characters long. So if you want to create up to 100 characters, great. However, it is a unique ID specific to that job. So as long as it incorporates some or all of the elements of those three components, those 3 fields, then you can create it however you want. So by way of example, using the subdivision example, the subname, the stage name, data construction, on the right-hand side are examples of how you can create an area of works ID. You could shorten Rapids Landing to RL38. You could and the date afterwards, or Rapids, whatever it is. It is a unique identifier for that particular project. That's the focus here. And for capital works, by way of example, now in the top example, there is no stage number. So we propose that you just work with the name. In the second example, there is a part number of that particular project. So the 01 in the black is what takes up the project number. The first part is the project name, and then you have the date. Oh, I beg your pardon. That's incorrect. I've led you astray there. If there is no project number, you just leave it blank. What I got confused with is that I want you to focus on the date, 5/19 versus 29/5/19. The 01 just defaults to the first day of the month if a day of the month is not specified. I beg your pardon. That was my mistake. So here's a tip that we'd like to offer you. There's the likely every specification has an area of works extent boundary. I'd like you to now consider that if you have a project, a subdivision development or a capital works project that involves stormwater or roads or open space, then consider that you only need one area of work extent boundary. And the key of the area of work extent ID is that the ID as an attribute field is included in every table, and that's what we're taking on as a minor update coming out after these series, that we will show the area of works ID in every table. Are we removing the data from the metadata file? No, we're just including an area of works ID as an attribute.
George?
Greg?
Are we allowed to interrupt you while you're speaking?
Never an interruption, so go ahead.
When I was working with Casey,
yep.
I used to chastise, well, not chastise, but to say to all the surveyors who sent in areas of work extent,
yes,
like you've just shown on the screen, that it's incorrect because it's not enclosing all the assets within the subdivision. And it may not be possible to have a common A-SPEC and D-Spec area of extent if you do that.
I got it.
Because the drainage may go beyond where your road network is, or vice versa.
Yes. Okay. So
I do have a problem with what you're showing on the screen now. It's very similar to what's in the D-Spec manual.
Yep.
And you've actually corrected it in the A-SPEC manual.
Yes. So that's right. We haven't. Thanks for bringing that up, Gregory.
Okay.
So essentially, we want to encompass these area work extent boundaries. They don't have to be survey accurate, but as Gregory has identified, they need to encompass all of the assets. Now, one of the things that we were discovering, Gregory, was that because of that reason, we couldn't actually apply all of the attributes to all of the assets. As you can see, bottom right-hand side, some of the attributes actually don't extend into it. So to be technically correct, we would modify the boundary to cover them. However, that doesn't guarantee that we know all of the assets that are in there, particularly if there's already some existing assets. So the purpose of the area of works ID is that it links back to this polygon. We're not going to duplicate anything. What we want is the area of works ID to be linked to this area, to this project work. So, so to cover off on your point, I agree with you. We need to modify this and also the description to cover off that all of the elements need to be covered by the boundary. The boundary is indicative, and we want to make sure that all of the assets in there are linked to the area of works ID. Does that cover off for you, Gregory?
Just something else. The reason why, or a good reason why, the area of extent should enclose all the new assets is that it is possible to submit more than one stage with a submission.
Yes.
And the stages are separated by the area of work extent graphically.
Agreed.
What you're proposing with the area of extent ID, are you proposing that that only exists within the area of work extent layer, or does that ID occur within all the assets that are enclosed within their work experience?
Correct.
Okay, so if that ID is attached to all the assets within that work extent, then it really doesn't matter
yes.
whether the assets are enclosed or not, because you have attached it via this unique ID.
Correct. So essentially,
it is one way.
Yes.
Go on.
No, you go.
And George? Oh, sorry, George. Yes, and I guess take it back one step. For me, the reason for an area of work extent would be to say that anything within that extends to the same date of construction and it's built by the same people. Is that the purpose you see in mind for this?
Correct.
Yep. Thank you.
Yes, and it's a good point that you raised, Mark, and I'm going to cover that off around the source as well. So, and look, someone's got an active family.
George, quickly following on from that.
Yes.
As I've just made the comment in the chat, A-SPEC is the PC for A-SPEC is normally a couple of months or a few months after the PC for the D-Spec and the A-SPEC, and it's normally different companies as well. So how do we deal with that in mind?
Well, look,
common.
Well, in that particular instance, I would provide a second area of works boundary. Now, it may be exactly the same boundary, but it's going to have potentially a different ID because it's got a different construction date and different elements. So that then goes back to what Mark and Gregory have been talking about the ID being matched to the assets. So this is the key thing here, so that councils know what has been built where, because that's part of their analytic that they run. Okay, thank you everyone for your...
George, just one more comment, Gabby here.
Yes.
One of the comments I heard was that you provide a separate area of works extent based on different people who do the work, and that's probably one of the key things for me as well, is that if you have two different companies, so if a surveyor is surveying work for two different companies,
Yes.
So one lot has done the road works and another lot has done the water, for instance, there should be two different areas of works because there's two different construction companies. And so in that case, definitely different polygons. But George, I want your comment on the following. What we have seen is that there are people who would have two areas of works which are exactly the same, and they have exactly the same ID, but submitted for every spec R and D, etc. What that results in is duplicates in the client database. So the suggestion there, that tip is it's not a rule that you can't submit multiples, but if it's the same thing, then my suggestion is that you submit it only once.
That's correct. Yep, very good point. Thanks for picking that up, Gabby. Yes, the intention is, we're not saying don't submit multiples. And thank you for everyone who has put in your comments. Yes, the boundaries could be different. The date and timing of construction could be different. The purpose of the area of works ID boundary is to show all of the common data applicable to that lot of work. So that's the key thing. So that's why we want to make sure that all of the key information is linked to a particular asset type. So happy to explore that further and take it offline. But the area of works ID, I think, will play a really important part in clarifying some of these anomalies that are now occurring because of putting all the common information in one boundary. Did that cover off for you, Gabby, and everyone else?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Okay, future-proofing. Look, it's important. One of the key things that we're looking at is how do we future-proof the specs? You know, what does it really mean, and you know what does it actually take? So I showed this example in our D-Spec presentation because this is the best example that I have to show you. So we're talking about a digital twin. A-SPEC is a digital twin. Why? Because it digitally represents what's in the physical world. So A-SPEC, if you like, is the filter, is the digital twin filter. And that's the way it's been operating. Would have loved to have coined this phrase digital twin back in 2004. I think we would have done pretty well. But it doesn't really matter. What we need to recognize is that we want to represent the best way that we can in our information systems what exists in the real world. And it's not just about the specifications. It's around the business processes. It's about definitions and descriptions. It's about flexibility and workability and interoperability with different systems. So that's what this diagram represents. We are focusing on digital twins. And here, this example again that I showed with D-Spec is the best example that I can give you. We don't currently have one with D-Spec, but I've asked Gabby to start looking at developing it for D-Spec and for the other specs. But as you can see on the left is a schedule. We're not going to, so I'll go back a step. So Revit and other 3D modeling packages focus on classification systems. There's OmniClass, there's UniClass, there's a specification, master spec, and there's other specifications in New Zealand, and there's a lot of classification systems. That's okay. Our focus is not on the classification system. Our focus is on the deliverable. So in this instance, we've got a duct that is identified in the picture. On the left is a schedule that's built of what's going to be delivered to the client. Why is that important? Because we're going to get an extract. Whether it's a SQL extract or MySQL extract, we're going to get an extract from that system. And all of those components are tied in to the specifications that we request. This is how we're providing the workability with D-Spec, with B-Spec, with all of the specifications to make sure that the data that you are putting into your information system for your asset management system and linking to your GIS is consistent. And the beauty of this is you get this extract, you can then create an asset ID in your asset information system, and it links it back into the Revit model, and straight away you've got a querying system fully integrated with your 3D model as well as your GIS, represented by the points, lines, and polygons that are specified in A-SPEC. That's how we see the future looking for incorporating A-SPEC into the digital twin environment, into the smart cities. Data formats. There's a number of data formats. We don't specify one data format over another. The approach has been, the philosophy has been, provided GIS ready data. That's the key thing, GIS ready. And so we want to make sure that to future-proof it, what is the most convenient way of doing it? And so GeoPackage is the OGC preferred standard for data exchange. We're recommending that people, for future submissions, look at incorporating GeoPackage as their deliverable. Doesn't mean to say that Esri is not acceptable, Esri shape files or MIFMID files or any other GIS ready files. What we don't support is a CAD format and an Excel spreadsheet as the deliverable. That's not GIS ready. For the exception of the organisations that are using the AC/DC product, because that is compliant with A-SPEC. Why? Because it enables you to work in your CAD environment and then have a deliverable that complies with A-SPEC, so you can put into your systems. Heads up for future discussion. There's been a conversation around precision for capture of assets. We've prepared a document out of some work that we did in New Zealand, and we want to present that for consideration to see if there's a willingness to incorporate that as guides for the kind of capture that you carry out for different assets across the specs horizontally and vertically. Precision and accuracy. Any questions so far? Okay, thank you.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I do have a quick question. Just on
Hi,
that
Marina.
last point.
Yep.
So I didn't understand that. What are you proposing? I mean, isn't everything that they submit has to be accurate and precise, and that's the whole point?
Correct.
Sorry, could you just expand on that further, please?
Yes. Yeah, good. Thanks, Marina. I've taken for granted that people have followed on from what I've said. We take it that the professionals in the measurement space, surveyors, understand the importance of capturing things to a particular accuracy. We often get asked, what kind of accuracy should we capture a pit, what horizontal accuracy, what vertical accuracy, and I cover that off a bit later on. So there's an assumed understanding that everybody knows what to capture. What we're proposing is that we put some information together, and one of the questions is this for consultants to review? Yes. It'll be a combination of surveying consultants because they're the professionals. We want to make sure that it makes sense to them, and also for the councils to see if it's important to specify, you know what, we don't need a pipe to be better than 0.25 or 0.3 of a metre horizontally, but vertically we want to make sure that the invert level accuracy is appropriate to the kind of terrain. Did that answer your question, Marina, or did I just get into too much detail?
I'm undecided.
Okay.
I still don't quite understand it, but that's okay. If you'd like to continue, I'm sure it'll come to me at some stage.
Okay.
Oh, good. Thank you, George.
So I'm happy to cover it off again in the wrap up. So hold on to that thought, and we can cover it off again. Okay. Thanks, Marina. Someone asked, did I mean ADAC or ACDC? I meant ACDC. ACDC being the open spatial product. If I said ADAC by accident, oh well, I guess that's a bit of a Freudian slip, but that's okay. Right. So I want to get into, there's a lot of topics that have been raised by the community. So some of these are fairly straightforward, and some I will spend a little bit of time on. These are common questions that we get. You know, who picks up the data? You know, how do we know that in open space we're meant to pick up the drainage data? Isn't that the responsibility of someone else? Or the open space people say, well, we're just picking up what's in A-SPEC. And, you know, well, how can we confirm what assets to deliver? Really valid points. Our position is that, and our advice or our recommendation is, understand what the client requirements are and get into agreement about what's expected. There's nothing worse than not delivering what's expected, or people assuming you know what we expect you to deliver us, and then there's a huge upset because it's not delivered. So what we've proposed is a checklist. Now I know that some surveyors that I've spoken to already have checklists with their clients about the delivery of asset data for them to collate and deliver to the client. What I'm now talking about is a checklist that says, well, okay, what kind of assets are actually expected to be delivered? Yes, we've got the design plans and we've got the construction plans, and there's interpretation required about what is to be delivered by whom. What we're proposing is we're going to put in into the A-SPEC document this checklist. It's very simple. If you'd like to use it, please go ahead and use it. If you want to get a copy of it and modify it for your own needs, happy to do that. What we're experiencing is that if we have some simple tick boxes there, that may actually clarify some of the uncertainty about what is expected to be delivered when you've got some ambiguity.
George, sorry, it's Marina again. I love that idea. We've actually been trying to implement something similar as a checklist. Is it possible to include just a box, whether it's a developer contribution as well, somewhere within that checklist? It just makes it so much easier for the assets team to know straight away how their assets are coming in.
Okay, so we can add a box in there to say whether it's a capital project
A
or a
DCP or
developer.
not.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks. I'll make a note of that.
Hi George, it's John from Taylor's here, mate.
John.
Just a quick one. This checklist is a pretty good idea. However, it needs to go all the way back to the planning permit stage. We've noticed a lot of councils who don't deal with A-SPEC data, as often as some other councils, just use generic terms and don't understand what they're asking for. So when it's written into the planning permit, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when we're providing fees to clients and whatnot and delivery items.
Yep.
So I think it probably needs to go a step further than this.
Okay. Well, we've got plenty of councils online happy, and Marina, what are your? I'm not that I'm want to put you on the spot or anything, Marina, but any thoughts about that?
I like it in principle, but I know with our council, for example, getting that level of buy-in at the planning stage is interesting. There's so many other planning processes that take place, even to get an amended question into the planning permit about, we've just joined, let's say, ACDC Open Spatial, the portal. So even to ask for that to be included as the must do now is quite an drawn out process. So I think for councils who are able to include it at the planning stage, that's really great. But even if it's wherever it is in the process, as long as it's in there somewhere, it's already a step forward. So I think wherever you can put it into your processes, put it in. It's a great thing to have.
Okay. Thank you. So what I'm hearing is that it's going to be a work in progress to look at shifting what the current practice is to what we want as an optimal process. So we'll take up that baton, John and Marina, and we'll make sure that we continue to communicate the importance of clarifying what the requirements are. Case sensitivity data links, and this just doesn't apply to D-Spec. This first part is some generic things, and then we'll get into some D-Spec specific things. So here's the scenario. Why do we need to follow the case sensitivity in data links? From a very simple philosophy of prescribing what is to be delivered makes it really easy to validate. Now with databases now, it doesn't really matter whether it's uppercase or lowercase, and we'll review that going forward to see whether we relax that particular rule. At the moment, this is what the rule is, and as you can see on this particular output, this particular data set that we reviewed, the consultant said to me, well, I guarantee you that everything complies. Well, sure, but now I've got to check, because it's not that I don't trust you, but I've got to do a check to make sure that it actually fits the rules. And what are the rules? Well, for example, the permit number, no more than 20 characters. Yes, George, but you'll see that I haven't given you anything more than 20 characters. That's okay. I'm not distrustful. I have a set of rules that I've built. ACDC has a set of rules that they've built. LizTech through their LizCAD product, Geocom Consulting, Civil Survey Solutions, OneSpatial, whoever it is that has put processes in place, they're based on what's in the spec. That's why we advocate strongly to follow data lengths and case sensitivity. The same rule applies with the line work. Why? We want to promote confidence and certainty that you completely understand the requirements. In this particular example, we can see that a center line was used to create a buffer for the polygons. That's fine. However, it's created a mismatch with polygons. So buffers are okay, and you can use them as a starting point, but it's then about tidying it up. And here's an example where a buffer isn't necessarily going to work. The green line represents the center line of this particular swale. As you can see, the top banks on each side, or the banks on each side, that center line doesn't cut right down the middle. So we really need to represent where the flow is and what the extent of the swales are. When's the next release due? Is there a list we can access? We'll determine following, October, November, following these forums, when the next releases are. We're proposing May 2021, unless. What's the unless? Unless there's a change that will impact the deliverable. And then I think we'll provide it possibly as an addendum, depending what that change will be. And, we're creating some minor changes at the moment. And for example, code list names not matching this to the C comment description. What do we mean by that? Here's a perfect example. 5 examples that we found in D-Spec, where the code list is filter drainage material, and the C comment field refers to when a filter drainage material is not listed, the new filter drainage material is to be listed. What we had previously was filter material. It doesn't fully represent. Now, does it impact the intent of that? No, but it's all about tidying things up. And the same with these examples. There have been some more critical examples where we've got a completely different name in the description of the C comment field. However, we don't see that we need to provide an updated version for that, but we will provide some documentation in the form of an addendum to show that please be aware there's some topography that we've addressed. An important point, we've identified, or consultants have identified, discrepancies between the sample data and spreadsheets with what has been in the PDFs. Look, we're really sorry for that, and we've identified that the impact to you is that you're trying to work out, well, where do I get my examples from? At this point in time, the PDFs are the source of truth. We will ensure that the other documents, the spreadsheets, the sample data, line up. In this case, it was around the examples. So fortunately, what we had was a scenario where the examples for a particular code list entry didn't match up with the code list. Not as critical as something completely irrelevant to that particular asset type. So we're endeavoring to clean those up as we go along. What is the purpose of the field source in area extent? Because it's not as constructed information itself. Correct. The actual boundary itself, we don't need you to measure that scientifically or measure that accurately. It's a representation of the area where the work has been carried out, as we've been previously talking about. However, there are 2 opportunities to record the source of information. And the source of information being, has it been a field note? Has it been off a design plan? Has it been aerial photography? Now, in new works, if you were to put aerial photography in there, that would be a non-compliance. In existing works, that would be completely appropriate. So the opportunity is to either record it once across the whole project or record against each asset entry. And what does that look like? Well, again, it's about, oh, let me see. I think I've just repeated that. I have. So, apologies for that. So in the area of works table, we have, if the source of the information is the same, then this is to be populated. In the asset table for pipes, for example, if the source of the information is the same, then only populate the area works polygon and use the default value here. What we're now going to do is put a similar comment in the area works polygon so that it can be referred to the table. Now, in our B-Spec presentation, one of the consultants stipulated that in the area works table, they put refer to table or refer to tables. So we'll provide you with an updated wording there. But the intention is, if the source of that data, it's all field work and it's the same across the whole project, then just record it once. If it's different for every asset type, then record it against the asset type table. Another common question, and again, this applies across the board, not just D-Spec, but across the board. The intention of that field is to record the image, the name of the image file that you're providing, assuming you're only providing one image file. Now, you don't need to attach it to that table, you just need to record it. And you provide that image in your package that you deliver to the organization. Now, if there's more than one image, then what we recommend and what's stipulated in the document is to provide a catalog so that the asset owner knows if there's a package of images for that asset, or in fact, if here are all the images for that whole job and they are linked to these assets and here's the asset ID. Whatever you do, it's important that those images can be clearly linked back to those assets. And another thing about the images, so let's take, for example, a pipe. If it's 100 meters long, how many images do we need? Well, we haven't specified this, but let's apply some common sense to this. Do we need to provide an image all the way along? No. You only need to apply one image unless the conditions change. The conditions might be a different pipe type, a different possible bedding material or backfill material. Unlikely in developments, but in that scenario. So we really want to limit the number of images that you have to take in a job. And I'm happy to discuss that in the wrap up as well. Please use terms already in use instead of inventing or borrowing. I totally get it. Agreed. Why bother changing from N/A to NA? They both mean the same thing. Yes, they do. What we're discovering as we're also maturing with our knowledge of databases and also with Gabby's involvement, because his background as a solutions architect, we're really getting to see the impact of some of the terminology that we've created, and yes, unknowingly we've created some messes and we need to clean them up and become aware of what those impact of the messes are. Does it mean that we're going to change every single term because it has a conflict within a DB? Not necessarily. but we do need to determine what is going to be done there. We need the value NAs. We don't get the information from consultants. The requirement on the condition, on the permit condition, is to provide A-SPEC data. I get that it's really difficult to be chasing people up all the time to get that data. The importance here is that we create the lines of communication so that we understand, and the end-to-end chain understand, whether it's a contractor, whether it's a consulting engineer, a surveyor, a data aggregator, that somewhere along the line for all new assets there has been approval that complies with the original plans issued for construction or complies with a variation. That's the information that needs to be gathered in whatever mechanism you need to do to get that information. And quite simply, if you're providing, if you're a surveyor providing data to a council that you haven't seen the construction of the trench that a pipe has been laid into, and you're saying this is the bedding material and this is the backfill material, and it proves to be incorrect, then there's going to be challenges. We don't want to see those situations, so we need mechanisms in place to make sure that all the relevant information is passed on. And really what we're talking about is we're verifying that what's been designed has been built to the design spec and recording what those changes are in very simple terms. I know it's not that simple when you're trying to collect it and you're out in the field and you've got limited time to do so. However, it's about looking at what else can you do to ensure that you have everything that you need.
George, can you perhaps quickly answer John Cliverden's question? Should source only refer to spatial data, or should it refer to attribute A-spatial data as well?
Well, the source refers to where you sourced that information from. So did you do field capture? Did you do on-screen data capture? Did you do, so it's about, it's inferred that it's both the A-SPEC tables are the attribute data. So I guess what I'm seeing probably for the first time is that the source is really the location-based data. So now,
yeah, it might not be applicable as much for, say, D-Spec, but for A-SPEC, for example, let's say road signs, the field crews aren't necessarily going to know, say, what reference the sign is. They could take out the engineer's design plan, so they'd have to get the sign reference number off the engineer's design plans rather than field work, when they'd pick up the sign itself by field work.
Yep, I got it. And John, I'm going to disappoint you by not answering it and have you bring that up in A-SPEC session in a few weeks' time. But I get it. So that's a good example. We need to look at what the source of that asset data is. I think both location and attribute. So we'll take that on board and have an offline conversation about that and some thinking.
Yeah, I guess the same could apply. The same could apply for, say, A-SPEC and trees as well. Would be applying, say, on tree species off the landscape plan.
John, we'll cover that 8th of September.
Yep, no problems.
And Malcolm, thank you for your question. Wouldn't you provide an image at every field joint or intersection? The question. So my question back to you is: what would happen if you didn't have those images at the field joints or intersections? And I'll give you some time to respond to that through the chat, but I'll continue on if that's okay. Now, some of you, or most of you, probably would have already read this. And for new assets, new subdivision works, new capital works, unknown or not applicable for a material, a pipe type, a diameter, anything that describes that particular asset is not a valid entry, because somebody somewhere has approved the construction of that asset. And I'll cover off your point there as well, Malcolm. A-SPEC is about recording what has been built. There are other mechanisms in place, as in, construction supervisors and inspectors that look at that. It's not for A-SPEC to be recording that in case something hasn't followed to spec, and I'm assuming that you're talking about the design spec, construction spec. It's too late. The photo is too late because it's already been done and completed. It's up to the responsibility of the people responsible for supervising that project to make sure that that occurs. Now, in terms of the code list values, we're going to be removing, we're reviewing all the code lists to see where unknown or not applicable is to be removed from new assets to be built. For existing assets, sure, it's still applicable. You may not know and may never know until that asset is actually ripped out of the ground or refurbed. File naming conventions. Oops, I'll go back a step. Okay. We request that you use universal file naming conventions as stipulated in the tables. I know for the validations that we do, we end up spending quite a bit of time renaming files because their different names are used. If the file naming convention is used, then it flows through our validation processes really quickly. And I'm sure that the same thing may apply to others who have validation processes in place. So important to follow the universal file naming convention. And we're also normalizing and standardizing that file naming convention as we go along. File submissions. Zip all files together. Use the area of works ID now, to create that zip file name. That will have you really be clear, and for me as someone validating data, I know exactly what I'm working with. I don't have to guess anything. And if I've got 10 files open that are called pipes, I can link that back because I've got the area of work ID incorporated in the original zip file, and I've also got it in that table. And include the certification table, a certification document. This is a valuable document. I apologize for the size on your screen. It might be quite small if you're looking at it. But this is actually a document that confirms what has been done for that job. And down the bottom, notes, comments, there's an opportunity there to list, and I hope this answers your question, John, about those different fields. Here's an opportunity to list where you got that data from, as in what kind of documents and who gave it to you, which combines which combines the field work along with the other work that you've done to collate that data. We basically, I guess there's from our experience is that there's an assumed understanding that horizontally, typically there's 0.25 a meter plus or minus 0.25 a meter data capture. This is data capture, not construction. There are other requirements around variations from design, what those tolerances are. And there are some companies out there like MNG in Victoria and WA who have got a really great process around recording and reporting on those variations in tolerance. And we're going to start building that into our specs. So there's an implied inference that horizontally plus or minus 2.5 is really going to do the job. You know, if you've got a 300 diameter pipe, you know, if you vary it by 0.25 a meter, is it going to make a difference? No. But if the variation is larger than the diameter of the pipe, then you want to be recording that difference. Vertically, as I mentioned before, it depends on the terrain. So if you've got a flat terrain, invert levels are going to be really critical, and there's a higher level of accuracy needed. And it's important that whatever you do, whenever in doubt with any of these, communicate with the asset owner through your lines of communication, maybe through your engineering consultant or developer or whoever it might be that engaged you to do the work. It's about communicating that. And Marina, going back to the point that you raised, and it'll probably be clearer when I send you the document. We've identified all of the kinds of assets that are captured through A-SPEC, and we've identified what kind of positional accuracy horizontally and vertically is important, and the level of precision. So the level of precision will be, you know, do we want an invert level to the nearest meter, or do we want it to 2 decimal places? That's the kind of precision that we're talking about. And the accuracy is then, okay, do we then want it 0.25, 0.05? That's what is specified in this document. I hope that goes further towards clarifying that for you. Now, I realise that we're now at 11:15 and cutting into Gabby's time, so I will go a bit further, knowing that I've got some time in the wrap up. So Gabby, you're still going to get your half hour. Don't worry about that. I will keep the wrap up time short and sweet. Okay, good pickup. The access diameter. Look, I've looked at it again newly, and yes, it just doesn't make sense. We're going to address that. And I guess the question is, what happens if you don't have that particular attribute? Please post your responses in the chat for us to monitor. Please add conveyance. So a request from a consultant. In this case, it's a decline because in the description of swales, we specify that linear depressions or channels that provide for stormwater collection and conveyance. So we already specify that these kind of swales are for conveyance. Quick question. I love it when someone says a quick question, because my experience, it usually is not. However, this case is, what's the relationship between the linear, bioretention linear, and OSDS linear centerline? So it's a relationship to link the centerline to the polygon, similar as the surface and surface centerline in A-SPEC. And true. The second part of that is about the ID. That's okay. The unique number is a number that the consultant creates, unless there's already an asset ID that's been created by the council, and then you can use that if they've notified you of that. So that's the first part. Create a unique number for that development. There's no rule about the numbering. You can start it at 47. It makes no difference. It is a number specific to that asset in that project with that area of works ID. Swales. More. Swales, how necessary are these fields? And again, so that we can have an open conversation around this, feel free to post your comments. And then we will monitor those comments and we'll report back to everybody as a post-briefing session for this. So swale length, yes, important for linear. Top width, base width, swale depth, batters. We're going to be guided by the subject matter experts, and for the fields for area for the batters, we're going to be guided by the subject matter experts who are maintaining these assets to let us know of the importance of these. Okay, one question that came through. What if the purpose of a swale is neither bioretention or vegetated? True, it may be rock-lined. So the intention is there's a swale and it may have natural material. It may be vegetated. It may be rock-lined. It's still a swale for the purpose of conveying stormwater down a network as part of the stormwater drainage network. Okay, so in this case, the way that this consultant has identified segmenting swales is really important. Why? Because they've identified that there's a direction of flow for each of the swales, and they've just been spot on in their assessment. Yes, 4 segments. That way you can record the specific attributes, particularly for invert levels, to show a direction of flow. And while we're on swales, what's the purpose of the centerline? Well, I just want to briefly go back to this earlier example. The purpose of the centerline is to show where the flow is tracking. And as you can see, it doesn't sit directly in the middle of the boundaries. Now, we also get questions like, can you assist us with mapping? Of course we can. We can do it formally through a project with you, or informally, such as these questions that were raised by this particular council that are going to a new asset management system. So we're happy to assist. Formally we'll look at not just mapping to the name, but also the attributes, the data type, all of those sorts of things. And that way we can do a, if you're not doing it, I would recommend that you do a comparison right through, not just with the name, but all of the attributes that you're collecting and the kind of data. So, you know, if you're getting a data type that's a text field and it's 20 characters, and you've got a data type that's a text field that's 10 characters, you're going to end up truncating your data. It's not a big issue increasing it to 20 characters. If you're
Can I just make an observation here, George?
Yes, Gregory.
When you're implementing a new asset management system,
yes,
it might be an ideal time to talk with your asset management people to find out what data do they need. Talk with your maintenance people to find out what data they need. Talk to your finance people to also find out what data needs to be captured. You don't want to be capturing data for the sake of data capture.
Great point. Completely agree. And then we can distill it into the requirements.
I mean, basically, the more data you capture, the more it costs to maintain it. So you want to be capturing a minimalist set of data.
Well, I'll challenge you on that, Gregory. That's one perspective. It then comes down to the maturity of the organisation with its asset management practice. So it's not something that we'll say you have to do, but we'll guide you through what other councils are doing so that you can get a sense of, if you want to go to that level, then this is the kind of data that you need to hold. But I agree with you. Don't capture data for the sake of capturing data. Okay, here's an example, short pipes. Okay, stub pipes. Yep, let's just, and I'm going to finish up in a minute so that you can, so get ready, Gabby. I'm going to give it to you in a minute's time. So short pipes, they're stub pipes. They're recorded on page 28 as stub pipes. You don't need attributes. However, confirm with your client that that's exactly what it is and that there's further development that's going on. Here's a really interesting one. And how would you classify this rock beaching in the photo below? You know, with OSDS linear. Okay, classify OSDS as rock. Is this okay? So yes, there's three elements to it. There's a lining material where you can record the material on the bank. Yes, rock is the appropriate entry. It doesn't currently exist, but use that, and we're going to include it. We've already included it into the new one. So the lining material, and you put C comment in the lining material field, and then in the comments field you put rock lining. Keep it simple. Stepping stones. Are they a flow management device or a weir? Well, we don't really know. We need to find out what the purpose is that they were built for. However, we would record them as a type of pathway, stairs, as they might have all the information that you need. So, look, at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Gabby. And in the wrap up, we'll cover off anything else that needs to be discussed, any other queries that have come up, and we can deal with it then. So, Gabby, I'm just finding you. Gabrielle.
I'm there twice, George.
Yeah.
On my phone as well. So I don't know how to.
There you go.
Okay, the one that's not.
Try that one.
Yeah, that's the one. Yep.
Great. You're it, Gabby.
George, thank you very much. Okay, I'll just put this on display. Can you see my screen? Oh.
Yes.
It's
almost
coming through there. Oh, that slide was not supposed to show.
I was there.
I thought I had. I thought I'd hidden that slide.
Okay.
Anyway, okay, we've had this discussion at length. This is a little bit more for the A-SPEC people, but what I'll just add to that previous discussion is that we've had people where you've got one asset class that you say from A-SPEC, and you have a whole bunch. Project is mostly an A-SPEC project, but you're also including trees. You don't have to have a separate area of works for A-SPEC and A-SPEC That was one of the issues that we highlighted. And then when you have an area of works ID, we will have an area of works ID in all of the other tables, and these will have to match, but more about that later. Just one of the things that we've done in Digital Hive is started offering data support. What that means is that we've made available, or we've developed a set of scripts that takes the specs, all of the specs, and converts them into or provides them to you as a SQL script. So if your IT department needs to create, or if you want to create a database with the specifications, then they are available as SQL scripts. Where this is going to go in future is that when there is an update to the script, then there will also be updated scripts. So if you are on the standardized SQL script, you will be in future, you will be able to just run those, and we'll provide the SQL equivalent for add, delete, edit, so that for your IT department, keeping the scripts or the data model in line with the spec will be a little bit easier. These are obviously also available for creating new, but that is just to make it easier to keep up to date with the scripts. We've been doing a lot of training in QGIS, and there's more about that. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. If you need training in terms of either QGIS or A-SPEC, there are some courses available, and George has been sharing that. So just keep an eye on the emails that come through. I want to switch over to QGIS. We've got a few QGIS projects that we've made available now, and I'm going to do a bit of a live demo. So this is a bit of a gamble. Now, just very quickly, so here is a project that we've created. That is actually an A-SPEC project. If you look at the data, you'll see that it looks a little bit like the demo data, and if you think that is correct, but I'll just show you what we've provided. So if I query something, one of the first things you'll see is that we've given you the longer name in the project file, so it's just easier to understand and query the data. And I'm just going to kill that, and I'm going to put it into edit mode and query it again. And this time what you'll see is that there's a whole bunch of green marks next to each of these. So if you're capturing data and any of those fields with the green marks have not been completed, then there's something wrong with that particular entry. Okay, and some of these things are, for instance, if you want to select a date, there, we've provided GUIs to help you enter the date correctly, and there's also lookup tables or pick list tables. So if you're not sure about the code, and we will have another discussion about code, then you can go and pick that value out of a pick list. All right, enough about that. If you are a developer and you want to, you've sent your people out into the field, they've done some field work, and now this is not showing up, and you want to bring the data in. So we have a tool that will allow you to capture data. Now I just want to show you how we make life easier, and for some reason my screen is not loading properly. Delimited text, there you go. All right, so just showing very quickly that kind of process. So let's say I've got this data that I want to that I've collected in the field. This is a comma-separated data file. A lot of the survey equipment will be able to produce something like this. Add and close, and I've just added a whole bunch of items. And I made a mistake. I did not specify the projection for that. So go and set up the projection and go apply. And you'll see that I've got a few things. Now, if I query these items, just going to go open the attribute table, you'll see that what I want you to notice is that I've got some data that was collected in the field, but some of these things are blank. And that's often where the default values are applied. If I take this tool, and I'm just going to select that data, then I'm going to move the data, because these are pits. I'm actually going to move them into the pit layer. And to do that, I have to set it to edit and move the data there. And if I now query it in the pit attribute table, you'll see again all the green tick marks where the data has been completed. Here is an interesting one. There's a blank, it has a green. It means that data has been entered, but it's not, there's something wrong with the data, because it's not finding that in the pick list. And I want to come back to that in a minute. Okay, you'll also see that some of these are now highlighted in an orange, and this is, so we know that there must be a street name. It hasn't been provided, so it's not going to pass validation, and it has the yellow mark against it. And I'm going to say some street. Look over here, and there's a bunch of these things, and I'm just going to add values for them. But the purpose of this is when you've collected data in the field and it's incomplete, then this will help you highlight and help you find the stuff that needs to be completed. You'll also see that some of these things, and specifically the ones I highlighted, the base RL and those, have now got the default values added. So what we've done is we've looked and automatically we have populated those. So this tool will allow you to automatically populate default values where that is appropriate. And going over to the last section, I'm just going to add some of that values. Here's a source that's missing. And I want to say that this is a field survey. And so this is just a demonstrator to show that how we've automated a lot of the tasks that's associated with the data capture. So whatever you bring in from the field, in order to get it ready to go out to the councils, you can use a tool like this to validate the issues that you may have, to find the blanks. I wanted to show something else here very quickly, and you'll remember that I've also had a lookup or a pick list that wasn't valid, and it's all these that's highlighted, and it shows in brackets that there is some data there, but it's the wrong. It's those data values are not in. They're not in the pick list, and that's because the data that was entered is CO, and it should have been conc. Just to demonstrate that part, and if I now save, then it saves okay, and it's not a problem. So we've done that, and this is enough for the moment. I can show we've done that for all the specs. We're still doing a little bit of QA in order to make sure that we've crossed all the boxes, but we hope that with a tool like this, especially for the survey community, it'll allow them to quite easily validate the data that they've collected, and it will highlight those sort of mistakes or things that's overlooked or missing elements in the data. Right, I think that's enough on that part of it. So that's the QGIS validation. Just on that, if you're interested in knowing more in terms of how we make this available, just get in touch with George or myself, and we can talk that through. The next part I want to show is the code lists. Now, we have spoken about code lists in the past, and I'll just quickly show you what we've done. So we've developed a set of code lists that's available in the public domain, but this is an API. This is the front end of the API, and it allows us to edit the code lists in a much more dynamic and a quick kind of way. So there is a public code list, but there's also code lists, an API management set of tools in the background that allow us to edit the code lists in real time. How that's useful to developers, construction people, is this particular tool could be made available on your mobile phone or in your application, and you'd be able to query data in the field if you have a need for this kind of thing. Now, I want to show you. I'm just going to take this out of the way. Apologies. I want to show you some examples of how you can use this. So let's say you are looking for a B-Spec code, and you specifically type in B-Spec, and you'll find that now filters everything that's B-Spec. Let's say you're looking for the asset status, and it will filter out all the B-Spec asset status codes available, and now you can see all of those that's available under B-Spec asset status. If you're looking for a particular code, you have a code, you don't know what it is, and you just type in that code, you'll see under INDF is available under B-Spec and under O-Spec, and it's really for individual footings. Another way is, let's say you're looking for something to do with concrete. You're not exactly sure what the code for some concrete is, what's the available concrete codes, and this lists all the concrete or codes that contains concrete across all of the specs. And if I now filter that to D-Spec, then there's the list of all the code lists that has concrete in them, and you can see pipe property, pit lid type, pit material, etc. will have concrete. So this is just a demonstration of how you could use this application, and you can use it in the field. It is an API, so it also means that councils will be able to link this to their applications, so that in-house on your desktop application, you don't have to worry about maintaining the correct code list. This will always be the latest. It will always be the most up-to-date. In terms of managing the code lists, we also have some tools that for some people who want to have their own code lists in addition, you'll be able to use the same tool to manage your own code lists in addition to this. What we would like is to get to a point where we start mapping. So if people gift a code list you know, from some asset management application. What we would like to do is to map the code lists together so that when we're talking about conc in A-SPEC, whatever it is that they use in the other system, that these could be found together, and that we make it easier for people to get access to the appropriate codes. So I'll stop at that and ask. There's one more thing that I want to show, but I'll stop at this and ask: are there any questions? Did you get what I'm trying to demonstrate over here?
Gabby, with I'll lead off with a question to create some conversation. Yep. Did you so if people want to access the API for their systems, so they can pull all of these codes in, what's the process that you've set up for that?
Well, first of all, they will have to get in touch, and we will have to make them set them up as a user of the system. Now we've developed the API; it's ready to go. What we are busy with now is to create a few sample applications for councils, just to help them to ingest the API. Not everybody knows how to do it, but if your IT department knows what to do with that, then they should be able to do that on their own. Whichever way we work, whichever way we're going to approach that, or sorry, you're going to approach it, what you'll have to do is you'll have to get in touch with us, and we will have to set you up to make the code lists available. Now, it does open up another part of this discussion. The code lists these will not be available for free. There'll be a very small amount of money that'll flow, and that's just to help us pay for the maintenance of the system, etc. And embedded in this is a relationship with a ticketing, you call it a ticketing system, but a metering system, if you like, that will help us to set up a relationship with your organization. So this system, I said metering system, it's a financial system that will, your organization will have to be a member of that. They will pay a minimal amount, and then have access to the codes. And depending on what type of access you require, there may be a different value associated with that, and that will be managed through this independent organization, and it is quite a powerful system that allows you to then also use that to you could do your own make your own data available through this system, and also provide a metering of that data and some financials. Now, if I have time a little bit later on, I want to show another element that we've developed, another API, and that's got to do with images. And just to talk about that, so if a consulting company, consulting engineers, or if a council go out into the field, and as part of an asset development process, you have to take photos of the assets. Now, those assets could also be shared or be made available through the system, and whoever is the owner of that will then get a clip of the ticket. Now, if I say a clip of the ticket, this this is all part of the cloud-based type environment, and so it's very much controlled. There's a lot of security involved, and if you don't want to make your data or your assets available, I say assets, I mean photo assets available via the cloud to just everybody, then it's not necessary to make that available, and you can block that. But the point at the moment is just that there is a system that allows us to control who's got access to it and who not. George, was that a concise enough answer for you?
For me, that was a lot of words, Gabby, but I think you've answered it.
Okay.
but here's me who's been talking for an hour and a half. So no, look, that's good. So just to recap, what you're saying is that people can access the API in a number of ways. They can just search for something. They can download a code list, and that's all available. You didn't say that, did you?
I didn't.
No.
So just going.
Well,
let
me recap on that. So,
okay, you go.
Yeah. So people can search for a code list, as Gabby showed you. Search for a code, as Gabby showed you. You can search for a code list and download that code list. That's all going to be available at to the public at no charge, isn't it, Gabby?
Yep.
Yep. So the cost that Gabby was talking about was incorporating the API into your asset management system, into your data capture process, into whatever systems you have, and that will be a commercial arrangement. And it'll be, and we're working out how we're going to meter that, how we're going to provide secure access, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, I'll take another minute just to show something else.
Okay.
I actually wanted to show this on my mobile phone, but I think sharing my mobile phone screen is a bit difficult. But what you see on the screen right now is a web app, but it's also available on the mobile. And this is the idea behind this is if you need to take photos of any of your asset capture while in the field, you'd be able to use this application. And I'm just going to show you, just capture a little bit of data captured in the field, which is not the truth. Pick a spec. Once I've picked D-Spec, it will filter and so give me the D-Spec type things. This is a drainage pit. It'll automatically take the date. I've set up my organization with a number of people. If I take my name, you'll see that automatically it's completed the rest of the data. On the desktop, it doesn't look as good, but if I click on this in my mobile app, that actually opens up the camera, and I will now be able to take a photo, and I can take multiple photos. Now, I can't remember. I hope I'm taking the right photo, and I'm going to quickly delete it if it doesn't work. If it's just a screen print of something silly, but the point is that I can have multiple photos. I'll just search one that I actually captured earlier on, and just load that. Discard my changes of the previous one. I'll just load this just to give you an idea.
Oh, you're going to brag about your backyard, aren't you?
I am indeed. So there's 2 photos that I've taken in my backyard, and that's taken with my mobile phone. important thing is that these become available as part of the app. And when you want to set up a photo reference for any of the assets, it already has various bits of data associated with it. In terms of the comments field, the idea is really that that should have been the ID, the unique identifier that you apply in the field. You can just put that in, and I will use that then to associate back to your asset capture. Now, this one in particular is still in beta, and there's maybe a few changes that still needs to be made. It is functional, it's operational, and I have had discussions with some of you about being part of the beta group. So in terms of this one, stay tuned, and we'll let you know more at a later stage. Over to you, George.
Thanks, Gabby. I will see about taking over then.
I thought I stopped the sharing.
No, that's okay. I can do it from my end. I just need to select it. Okay, here we go. Rightio. So we've just completed that session. Thank you, Gabby. So a lot of food for thought. You know, we're looking at, again, future proofing and the like. So you know, just in the quick wrap up, I know that we have this scheduled until 12 o'clock, and if you need to go at 12 o'clock, you know, please just bid your farewells and off you go. If you can stay for another 5 minutes past 12, we'll be complete by then. So this will give you an indication that, yes, there's some work that's going on. There are some new codes coming up. You can see, you know, that we're now looking at some more codes for capture. These codes you will see are for D-Spec version 1.0.5. That's for things that are already existing. These capture sources will not apply to D-Spec 9.0.5. And you can see just below some of the other codes that we're starting to populate. So the intention of having that API available is so that people can see live what's going on rather than having to download a spreadsheet and catch up. We'll still have a spreadsheet, but we'll be moving towards the API sooner rather than later. And again, it's about whether you want to take up the API as a web service or you just want to access the API for querying. So there's a number of options there. You would be aware from our newsletters and things that we're running QGIS courses with A-SPEC involved. Gabby is responsible for those. He's the convener of those courses, and they run every Tuesday and Wednesday. That's all I'm going to say about that. The API code list release is scheduled for November 2020. Please contact Gabby or I if you'd like to find out more about that, about how it would work in your environment, particularly from a web services perspective and what we have and what we intend to have for security. Next release scheduled May 2021, unless there's something that comes up. A-SPEC certification. I'm just going to talk about this for a couple of minutes. The intention of this is that we're developing a certification process that by June 30, 2021 will be available so that we can address what the processes are that organisations have for communicating compliance with A-SPEC, non-compliance with A-SPEC, what mechanism do they put in place to address disputes. So this is something that will be part and parcel of A-SPEC going forward from June 30, 2021. More APIs are planned. What do we mean by that? Well, we're now looking at, can we deliver the specs technically? So I think we do a pretty good job with the PDFs. There are a lot of other documents that we provide with the spreadsheets and so on. We're moving away from that. We're going to go to a more mature process, and this is what Gabby is bringing to our organisation and our community. The ability to start looking at things through web services, through more database querying, to enable updates, incremental updates and the like. Yes, and there will be a new commercial model. There is a recap session scheduled for Tuesday, 13th of October. And that's the highlights. It'll go for 3 hours because we've also invited vendors to present. They'll get a 10 to 15 minute slot depending on the number of vendors that we have. So far we have 4 that have agreed, along with Gabby, who will talk about other technical things that we're dealing with. One Spatial have agreed to present. Global Visioneering have agreed to present. These are the organisations I've spoken to so far. Open Spatial have agreed to present. Geocomp Consulting have agreed to present. And really what we're looking at is, what is it that you are doing for the community? So if you want to get under the hood, now is the time. And and reserve your place, because those bookings are now available through a separate link for A-SPEC. And each time we send you a reminder, you will get that information with a link. Lastly, I want to acknowledge everyone that's come on this link for your commitment, for your contribution, for giving up 2 hours of your day, wherever you are, to participate in this. It's really given us, Gabby, myself, and also Kelly Ireland, who is our communications consultant, who's been listening in the background and giving me some tips along the way. We're looking at how we can engage with you that's going to make a difference. This is about you. Yeah, sure, Gabby and I and Kelly come up with the ideas, but it's not about us. We want to see how we can be in service of the community. And these national forums are here to stay. We will still have our face-to-face, and I love our face-to-face, and you can't hide in a back row when you're in a face-to-face. But essentially, this is all of the stuff about the opportunities that COVID have actually presented to us to be clearer about what we communicate to you. So thank you for your contribution and ongoing support and advocacy for this community.